Hey, look at me. I am the co-host now.
And that's how we're introducing the episode. Hello guys, and welcome to the Hit or Miss, the Big Screen Podcast. Yes, we are back for episode 2 now, and I'm doing this introduction completely off the fly because I hadn't anticipated doing the hosting of the introduction today. After the previous episodes, we did reveal we're going to be doing Captain Phillips. We did announce it on Twitter before the episode came out, but sticks and stones, this will not break your bones, thankfully. Or maybe it will, like it did with many of the pirates in this film. Yes, it is called Captain Phillips. And it is one of my favourite films of all time. Michael came into this blind, didn't you, Mike?
It's basically, the reverse of what was last week, whereby you already explained we didn't just pick the movies out of nowhere. They were kind of a random selection. But last week I got one of my favourite films of all time that you'd never seen. And this week you got one of your favourites that I had never seen, but obviously have now.
Yeah, precisely. And I'm sure we'll get into, we will get into your thoughts and my thoughts, of course, in a short while. But first I'm going to introduce the film, give an explanation of it. So Captain Phillips is a film released in 2013 that is based on the true events of the Mazurk Alabama's voyage in 2009. It is directed by Paul Greengrass, who some viewers may know from his work as the director of the Bourne films. Michael, have you seen?
Oh my God, it's Jason Bourne!
You have, of course, seen the Bourne film, surely.
I couldn't resist for the meme. I actually haven't. I just know that meme really well.
Oh, yeah. The gif's fantastic. I usually sometimes. But this isn't the Bourne films, but he did direct the Bourne films. It stars Tom Hanks as Captain Phillips and, oh God, I'm going to butcher this name, Barkhad Abdi as Abu Wali Moose. I hope I did that justice.
I believe it's Moose, weirdly enough.
Moose.
Because I was reading the subtitles and I was pronouncing it Muse, which is how it's spelled. And then I went and looked up some of the kind of real life situation and stuff when I'd seen the film, and apparently it's pronounced Moose. It's like there's an accent on the E, but I was just reading it as Muse.
In the film, it was like Moose.
Maybe it's somebody that mispronouncing it somewhere on the way.
Perhaps. But yeah, Michael, obviously this was your first time watching it, and you had told me privately, before many months.
I get briefly, yeah.
Yeah, my favourite genres, except sci-fi, of course, so thriller and character dramas, are not genres you typically gravitate towards. So were you pleasantly surprised going into this film, or going out of the film, since this isn't normally one you would have watched ever if you hadn't done the podcast?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like we discussed, as I said to you, because we briefly discussed our thoughts without getting too spoilery, and I said it's one of those things where I think I don't like biopics and kind of real-life biographical dramas, but every time I've watched one, I've ended up really loving it, and I own quite a few of them. And they're among some of my favourite movies. Things like All the President's Men, Frost Nixon, First Man, are the three that spring to mind that are some of my favourite movies. And it's kind of like, I don't know why I have this unconscious bias. But even going into this, I was kind of like, I have a feeling this might be a bit slow and a bit... because I'm always a little bit like, there's no aliens or, excessive action or crazy stuff, so this is just going to be boring. But no, far from it. I really, really liked the movie after having watched it. Not to give too many spoilers. I did have some nits to pick, maybe, that we might get to if we're going, I don't know how you're doing this sort of chronologically or whatever, but overall it was an incredibly good, really enjoyable is perhaps the wrong word, but it's definitely a film where you can appreciate the excellence that kind of went into it and what was done. And crazy bit of trivia for you. Did you know the lead of this film, right? He voices Woody in them their Toy Story films. Crazy, man.
It's sometimes very hard to separate the characters. It's like I see Tom Hanks, but I'm picturing it as Woody. So my brain is going crazy.
I didn't have that with this, and sometimes I'm kind of like that, where I'm like, I wish they'd kind of cast an unknown because it's hard to see. But Tom Hanks is a very good actor, and I didn't at any point think, I'm just watching Tom Hanks. I was kind of, I was swept into it, and obviously the actors playing the sort of Somali pirates and stuff were all actors that I wouldn't have known even if they were kind of famous, and I don't think they were. This was their big break. So the realism was kind of there. The only instances other than that were a couple of character actors playing the Maersk Alabama crew who I was like,
we'll get there.
I've seen that guy in Doctor Who, and I've seen that guy in something else. So I kind of,
I'm really glad about that. You didn't touch on it about the format. We're not going to be doing the spin the wheel format. We'll be doing the hit or miss format, but let's strict, of course. Spin the Wheel being the name of our other podcast. This is going to be a linear-ish review, but we can allude to any scene we want to at any time. That being said, we are going to go from the start, where we see Hanks and his and the woman portraying Captain Phillips' wife. For me, Catherine Keener, thank you. A very slow, restricted start compared to the very next section of the poor, though hectic Somalian village. Personally, I think this is to show the difference in civility between the two cultures. One is very organised and have their lives planned out, whereas the other is more on a whim, so to speak, leading to more adventure and danger. I believe it did so very well in portraying that, if that's what they were going for, of course. What did you think of the whole sequence?
In terms of how it started, I have both praise and criticism for the way that it was. I'll start with the criticism, which is that I feel, maybe this is perhaps me being a bit too controversial, but I feel like the way that the Somali people were depicted was a tad kind of racist and simplistic. It was very much, bad guy, and I didn't feel like we got a lot into why they are in the kind of economic state that they are, or why they go out doing these things. Which, to be fair, isn't necessarily the story that you're telling in this film, but it did leave me kind of like, so why is that scene, almost like, why is it there in the first place? Because it gives us very surface level stuff. But on the other hand, from that, as I was doing my research into the sort of the film and where it came from, discovered that it's based on a book that the real Captain Phillips wrote, which I'm sure you probably know. But the book's narrative is completely different because it tells the story of kind of the hijacking of the Alabama and the pirate story and everything that we know from the film. But it intersperses it with Captain Phillips' wife back home, seeing this on the news and her various kind of emotional reactions to the things that happened. Yeah. Which they had filmed apparently for the movie, but they kind of cut it out because they wanted to tell the contained story. And I do actually, that's where I wanted to give praise, because I think that was the right decision.
Same. I think that was definitely the right call. And I think I have seen some people, particularly one specific person, I think he was the one you're on about in terms of, you recognize that guy from something else. It's the, I think it's that guy who, the real life guy, says he wished he'd saw more of that. So I'm going to get into the crew's take on the film later. But
there's some criticisms about how much of it is. Yeah. But I'll just say this up top now, that having researched that, yes, there's some inaccuracies, but there's actually a website that tests the accuracy of.
Yes, and it was like 81.4%, wasn't it?
I think it was more, it was like 84 or something % accurate, which for a biopic is like massively high up there, because usually they take a lot of dramatic liberty, but this one seems not to have done all that much. But there are things that were different, obviously. So,
Well, while we're at it, I'd like to praise some of the performances now. Yes, we will talk about Hanks and Abdi later, I'm sure. But my God, everyone played their part. There was, of course, some roles that were very minimal, but every actor did a great job. I mention this because when it comes to the pirate law, only Abdi is really brought up in conversation. But I think, again, with the names, Faisal Hamid as Naji, the very imposing, shouted guy. He was very intimidating as well, and had some great screen presence.
I didn't. Sorry to jump in, but I didn't love his. I didn't love his role because I found it very one note. It was very like they wanted to humanize as much as possible. What's his name? The leader, Muse or whatever. Yeah. So he kind of felt to having to be the mustache twirling, like, this guy is a villain. And again, when you read about the real life story, apparently every one of the Somali pirates, other than the lead guy, was like 15 or 16 years old, which you don't get a sense of in the film. It's like the one guy that's like, I can't believe it. But in reality, there really wasn't any. They kind of do that Hollywood thing that I balk at a little bit, which is like,
it's for dramatic
you need
purposes.
A villain. Yeah. Oh yeah, you do need a villain, but because it's a real life person, I just feel kind of like, that's a little bit. It doesn't sit fantastically with me. Okay, if that makes sense.
But the point still stands. My point, in my opinion, that the actor did have some great screen presence, and what's even more amazing, that was his first ever acting role for anything. Do you agree?
Wow. Yeah, I do. As I say, I think my problem isn't so much with the acting as the way that he was written. He's playing exactly what he's supposed to be, which is we need a straight out-and-out villain. But in terms of what you're saying, which is the screen presence and the actual sense of threat and fear, 100% absolutely couldn't have done better. at that role. And if you're saying it's his first role and he's doing that, he could have one massive successful career as like a horror movie villain or something like that. So definitely kudos. That's a skill within itself, you know.
Yeah, and he did move, I am sure he moved location in 2014 to get some roles, but it wasn't until like 2016 until he started picking up some roles, and then I think since Captain Phillips he's had about 3 or 4 other roles. So yeah, his career's picking up a bit, but it's still not at the level I'm sure it could be, because I think he could be a very good actor, and I think, yes, his performance in this is very one note. It's just a very stereotypical angry person, you know what I mean? There's nothing special about the character, and all the attention really is focused on the leader Moose, and also is it Naji, the young guy who had his foot cut?
I think Naji was the sort of the real villain guy, but I could be wrong. I couldn't really keep up with the names because they were quite hard for me to get my head around anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know who you mean. There's the young guy, because there is only one person that they say, oh, he's only like 15, whatever years old, and he's the guy who gets his feet cut on the glass, and then he's blatantly who the movie wants you to feel a bit of sympathy for, I think.
Yeah. And to an extent, the lead pirate as well, Moose, because there are some nice scenes. Again, it's not a linear review, so we can get into it. The scenes where they're in the lifeboat, where they're kind of just talking, but it kind of tries to humanize him there, but I think it has the reverse effect for me. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get there. I actually agree with you. That was one of my other sort of. It's not really a criticism because it's not a problem that the actor brings to the role, but I just think it's kind of, there's a little bit of a Hollywood thing going on where it's very transparent and I can see through, like, I don't necessarily believe that this was how this guy would act. It's just that we need to have a bit of sympathy, so he's kind of more open to the suggestions of Captain Phillips and seems more nice, and he's kind of like, nothing will happen. And I'm left kind of, I mean, I wasn't there, but I'm left believing sort of like, I bet that wasn't the case in reality. That just seems like it's a Hollywood thing to, like, you have to feel sympathy for this person, so we'll make him a little bit more amenable to things rather than being scary, you know? Yeah, and that's kind of ties into your other point about the big shouty guy being very one note. Is like, you have to have some counterbalance, and having counterbalance within the team of the pirates is kind of does make sense for a film like this. It's like, sure, you can have Tom Hanks oppose this guy, but to have another pirate oppose this guy, like one is very mean and the other is really sympathetic, that collision kind of, you could class it as trying to build up sympathy, build up a character for him. But yeah, and I think that works really well in the film, and that's why I don't particularly. I agree with the criticism that it's only one note not performance-wise, but you know how he was written. But I still think the fact that they had that kind of back and forth was very good.
It works in terms of, you know, it makes you feel what you're supposed to. It's just that having watched a lot of movies, was like, yeah, I'm very aware you're manipulating me, and I don't buy the reality of this. I'm just like, I'm supposed to feel he's a bit more tolerable now, you know, and this other guy is pure evil, and this other, the young kid is the innocent who's been dragged along on this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure if real people fit into these kind of Hollywood stereotypes in reality, but...
Let's not forget the boat driver.
Yeah, which, to be fair, he had nothing to do. Yeah. He had no character whatsoever. Poor guy.
Yeah, well, he wanted some fresh air, so he beat the window. I guess he had that. You talk too much. Yeah.
So this is probably a complete tangent, and you may cut it, but when I was looking at the IMDb trivia for that scene, they were saying that it's a problem that he says that what does he say, that the gun still has the magazine in?
Yeah.
Because those guns don't use magazines, he means clip. And then somebody's immediately commented underneath that pedantry with, well, Captain Phillips wouldn't know that because he's not a military man. So maybe it's more realistic that he would have said that. Yeah. And I was like, wow, I can be pedantic about things sometimes, but that's a new level, man.
Yeah. But I'm sure that would trigger a lot of, you know, gun experts. How could you write something in such a big film that goes against our terminology? Screw you.
Yeah, completely.
Again, it's a bit pedantic, but yeah. Now onto the scenes on the ship itself. Captain Phillips goes around inspecting the locks, which did happen in real life. In doing so, he noticed a lot was unlocked as portrayed in the film, which leads on to another point that feeds into the reality. You may not be aware that this film has taken some slack from the crew that were on the voyage itself, who said that the film did not portray the captain's performance accurately. Rather, it was dramatized and falsified his actions. For example, I believe he did not lock the doors of the wheelhouse or the bridge or whatever you want to call it. I did not listen to the piracy reports, which suggested that they travelled along a course far further from the coast that they actually did. Of course, the latter is somewhat portrayed in the film, but never built upon, if you know what the scene on about, where he's looking at his computer.
Yeah.
But it's never really explained.
I read the same thing, which is that a couple of the people that were on the voyage are suing the real Captain Phillips, and I think the case is still ongoing, saying that he was too lax about things. He'd received emails about piracy, and far from being like the panicked sort of now let's be super secure that's in the movie, he was like, oh, well, we need to get there fast, so we're going to just cut through this way that we know is renowned for piracy. Now, I'm not judging one way or the other. I wasn't there, but I'm just saying that's what they are accusing him of. But having said that, there is at least one crewman who was on there with him who says, actually, the film's quite accurate to what he was actually like. And
Shane,
knows,
I think it is. Shane Murphy.
Yeah, exactly. But you may know about more than me, but it's just I was intrigued that you never know with these things if it's just Americans wanting to be, litigious money grabbing kind of thing, or if there is, or to be fair, as is usually the case, maybe the truth is somewhere in between, whereby he did want to sort of cut the route short, but he wasn't quite so not caring as they perhaps want to portray him as for their case,
I mean, you did mention this, the lawsuit after the events of 2009. He did state in the lawsuit, in the testimony, that he deemed that no matter how far they veered off the ultimate course that they went on, it wouldn't have mattered because the pirates have been known to go way outward from the coast, like 900, 1,200 miles, which was also presented similarly in the film, where Tom Hanks delivers the lines like, if you go 400 miles, they'll be there. If you go 800, there'll be another. So who am I to judge? Clearly, it wasn't too accurate if the crew themselves saw fit in coming out and objecting to what the movie says. But for the record, information is beautiful. Did deduct that 81.4%, that is the figure, of the movie was accurate to real life events, which, like you said, is pretty damn good for a big film like this.
Oh, completely. And when it comes to individual people's actions, but to get it back to a sort of film review kind of place, I really loved those scenes of tension with the crew in the kind of break room. The first one, I was kind of like, oh, this guy's a typical dick boss that I've had a few times where it's like, oh, you finished with your coffee yet? Get to work. And I was kind of like, oh. But then the second time, it flips it on its head rather wonderfully when he's kind of going in there. And I didn't realize until reading up on this that apparently the only person who knew that the guy was going to argue with him about, like, I'm not fighting pirates, I'm a Union man. The only person that knew that was the guy saying the lines and Tom Hanks. Everybody else in the room didn't know. So their reactions are all kind of genuine when they're like, ooh, shit, you're back-chatting the captain kind of thing, Oh,
that's brilliant. I never knew that.
You can kind of sense the tension in the room, and I don't know if maybe that's why. I mean, I would guess so. And it's a directorial decision, like maybe that's why, because they're going to be kind of unsettled and a bit off their game because they're like, "Ooh, this isn't in the script. What's going on here?" kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And another bit of trivia that you may not know, like I just didn't know about that. That's completely threw me. There were actually 3 skiffs that approached the ship initially, with 2 pulling back after Phillips made the fake call before stalling the third by making the waves bigger to their advantage. And yes, if we did actually take place. It did actually take place during a drill, which I found incredibly scary. Like, I've been on cruise ships, and if something happened like that when I was in the middle of a drill, I'd be terrified. I'd be like, even though you are practicing what you're supposed to do, you'd be like, oh crap, we have to interrupt this with a real life situation. And it's not portrayed as horrifying in the film like a horror film would. Rather, it's shockingness. And Hanks's reaction to seeing the map register 2 skiffs that really portrays the what the fuck moments.
I'd say it comes close. I'd say it comes close to a horror movie like at times, because there is that level of tension, and it is a skill within itself. Because I was going to say, again, from a review perspective, those scenes of the skiff, certainly the skiffs chasing, and then the kind of cat and mouse game, and ultimately they fend them off the first time and then the skiff coming back the second time. Those scenes to me are genuinely tense. And watching it for the first time, I didn't know. Well, I knew from kind of trailers and stuff and from the famous kind of scene that's been memed that they end up on the ship. So I knew they would end up there one way or the other, but I didn't realize there was kind of a, I guess, false start, for want of a better word, at first, where they try and fail and then the next day come back and try again, and that's when they kind of get on board. And I found that really tense, and despite knowing the outcome, I thought, yeah, this is really incredibly well directed, and it can't have been easy because it's almost all on the sea in real sort of boats and things.
Yeah, and another fun fact before I do actually get to an opinion on the scene and the behind the scenes stuff, they actually used a sister ship to film this on, so it was actually filmed at sea, and it was actually filmed on a quote-unquote replica because it looks exactly the same of the Mazurka Alabama, which I find incredible and really, really good, intricate detail of the production.
Yeah, absolutely. I read the same thing. The Maersk Alabama, I think I read somewhere, is still in service, but the one they used for the filming was a sister ship that, because it's the same company and everything, it's identical in every way.
Yeah.
Except that once or twice, apparently, if you're clever and careful and freeze frame, you can see the real name of the ship in the movie. But I'm not going to deduct points for that. For crying out loud, that's really like, obviously they weren't on the real ship. You know? So.
But speaking of your original point, I'd like to give a big shout out to Henry Jackman, who composed the score. Among others, he composed the Captain America and Jumanji films. Michael, what are your thoughts on the threat and the musical score? Maybe the latter at this point.
The thing is that that was a criticism that I had, not to get into an argument or anything, but I thought it's really good, the music and the tension and stuff during those intro scenes, but towards the end of the film, I really found that it was getting overpowering. And as a kind of, not so much a director, but as somebody who knows the kind of film and would like to work in that field someday, I thought the scenes when Phillips is, not to jump ahead, but the scenes when he's in the lifeboat and it's supposed to be tense, I was like, I would really rather have had no music playing over these scenes to emphasize the claustrophobia and the kind of the nervousness. But
it depends, because that was actually one of my phrases. That was one of the things I really loved about this film, was the lack of score during the lifeboats. I like at the end, of course, the climax, there's going to be music, but I'm not sure what scenes you're specifically on about, because for the most part, I'd say about 80% there was very minimal music, and it emphasized the waves crashing on the sides of the boat, which I really loved.
Completely, but there was a couple of times when it was, I suppose it was scene transitions is what you would call it, but when it was kind of the camera panning back over to the lifeboat before going inside, where I found the music was really loud and very like, this is what you should feel. And I was like, I already know, I'm already tense and I'm feeling it because of the script and the acting, so I don't need the music. And then the other one that I found a little bit too overbearing is, like you said, when they kind of have that moment of tension inside of the lifeboat, then they open the hatch and see the Navy and everybody there, and just from nowhere the music just intrudes and blares in and like dun dun, and I was like, I don't get a sense of how tense this must feel for those pirates seeing that, because your music is like, here come the Navy, and I was like, oh, I didn't need that. But yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, because like you say, it works to build the tension at the start of the film. I just thought by the end it was intruding a little bit.
That makes sense. I don't particularly agree, because I just focus on the acting and the story rather than like the music being overbearing. I just think I agree with you that it's incredibly loud. It is incredibly loud, but I just think, to me at least, it adds to the experience. It's like spine tingling, hair raising to me, not as opposed to I can't hear a bit of dialogue. Not that you said that, but just, you know, it gets overbearing. It kind of, you already feel the emotion, so it doesn't have to do that. It doesn't complement what's being portrayed to you. I think that's what I'm saying.
It's just, I think, it worked really well, because like I never normally notice these things anyway. I'm capable of just watching a movie and then letting it do its thing. And like I say, I think it did that really well during the initial attacks on the ship and everything. But by the end, I was very much like, it's announcing that this is a movie during some of the more tense scenes, perhaps. Yeah. But again, I don't know how I'm not a composer. I don't know how I would do that. Maybe a little bit more subtle, or maybe just less music by that point in the film. But you see, it's a nitpick, but I do think they could have done better at scoring the second half of the film, maybe.
Okay. But to again bring it back to the second attack now, I said the intensity is definitely ramped up with the music, ironically, and the general personas of the crew and Phillips in particular when it's revealed that one skiff is on the return. It's as though they're aware they'll be more prepared this time, as in the pirates are going to be more prepared. Thus, it's more serious. Personally, I love the whole sequence, and the rush to stop the pirates from boarding is truly great. From increasing speed to Phillips literally all over the place clawing for the box with the flares in. I just think it was fantastically scored, fantastically acted. And again, it's with these kind of character drama pieces, biopics you could say, it heavily relies, most of these films, on the story, and I just think the writing is fantastic in this film. Yes, there's some characters that don't get a lot of attention, but my god, the story is great.
Completely. What was I going to say? During the attack, this is actually a praise, which is because it's a real life situation, what could be a criticism is a praise, because I was so tense and so nervous, again, knowing even though that they're boarding the ship, that I'm like, virtually not so much screaming on my TV as I'm watching alone, but internally I'm thinking to myself, why the heck are these people not armed if they're going into pirate waters? Why don't they arm these? I mean, I get they're civilians, but why is there at least not maybe an armed contingent on board? Or why have they got no protection whatsoever?
Did you read about that? How it's just like, again, it's laws and stuff like that. Like in America, it's an American ship. In America, you can have a gun if you've got a gun license. Like, why? It's a good point. Why don't they have it on ships? But it's just like money stuff and stuff like that. And it's just
not even that. Like, I get you couldn't just give civilians guns, but like they know they're going into dangerous waters. What's to stop them putting one or two, the equivalent of like security guards on board, just in case? Again, it's
happens, money.
You know?
Like, yes, sure, exactly, it's a big ship that's in a movie, but it's only in a movie because of the events. Like the ship itself may look big and cool, but you gotta think the cost-cutting measures of these companies, not to criticize the company here, but, you know, a lot of these companies.
Well, that's the thing. It's not a criticism of the movie. It is a criticism of real life, because it's kind of like, I've worked in news agents and stuff in the past where they had a security guard, but this ship with like massive amounts of cargo that knows it's a target that's heading into pirate water is just like, just lock yourself in and call for the Navy. They'll be there eventually. Yeah. Really? Is that the best they can do?
Yeah. Again, I do agree. It's just a real life issue that should be addressed.
It's not the movie's fault. It's to the movie's credit that I'm left thinking, this is so tense. Why in the heck have they got no other recourse than just hide and hope for the best? You know. Again, I don't know if it happened in reality, but I really would love to praise the scene where he kind of calls for help and just gets the response of, they're probably just fishermen. And he's like, well, they're not just here to fish. And really,
that literally happened. That was the exact interaction.
I could believe it. I could believe it. I didn't want to say like it definitely happened, but I can believe it because I've been in, not that situation, but situations like that where you're talking to somebody who about something serious and they're just like, oh yeah, I'm sure it's nothing, don't worry about it.
Surface level response, and the fact that was real, like, you know, the course of the ship, and like if you got piracy warnings from these people, then it must have been serious. But here you are in a real life situation and you got this person on the other end of the phone saying, lock your doors, check the security, and I think, what the hell? Like, surely there's got to be some better advice or like some support. Like, the only support, quote unquote support, that they actually got was Captain Phillips, pretending to have support on the way on the phone, and which was clever, which was very clever, but I think you did allude to it, to my next point, kind of, when the pirates do board the ship and they go heads on with the crew, more specifically Phillips. This is what the real life crew take the most issue with, his heroic portrayal in the film, especially the moment where he offers himself as opposed to the pirates killing the other crew member, which apparently did not happen. However, when Captain Phillips supposedly had the upper hand and takes control of the situation, he and we, as a viewer, are brought back way down to earth when the pirates deliver the iconic line, look at me, I am the captain now. It's like, yes, Tom Hanks, his character, has the control over the room. Supposedly, he's showered at this pirate and he's brought the pirate's intensity down. But then he just looks at him and he thinks, I am actually the captain now. I think the chemistry is incredible, don't you think?
Oh, completely. And I wanted to say about that scene, you probably already know this, but one thing I didn't know till I was researching as well is, and forgive me for butchering the name, that Barkhad Abdi, playing Moose or whatever, completely ad-libbed that line, the most famous line in the movie. And I was that guy deserves a raise, because that's the line everybody knows. And for that to just be on the spot, like, I need to exert my authority somehow. And you can kind of tell watching it, because he falters a little bit where he's like, look at me, look at me. He says it a couple of times and then just goes, I'm the captain now. And I was like, oh, wow, that is... Because I think it may have just been scripted as like, look at me. And then that was it. That was it. But,
yeah. Is that like a Time of Angels? Is that like a Time of Angels moment where, the Matt Smith moment where he holds onto this bit of string and then he pulls it down, and then that wasn't like recorded, and then the director liked it so much that he kept it in, or like they had to reshoot it? Or was it like the first time it was filmed, it stayed in the movie, or did they have to redo it like that, do you think?
I think it was just as they filmed, because, I mean, like I said, they were doing things like that anyway, because, like I said, I read that not many people other than the two people in the first scene of the coffee breaks and things, only the two people acting knew what was going to be said there. And, I mean, I don't know, but I would assume that Paul Greengrass, the director, was kind of like, okay, Mr. Abdi, I need you to exert your authority. Just tell him to look you in the eyes and be really like, impart some tension, but we're not going to tell you, what exactly word for word to say. And then when it happened, it's one of those kind of fortuitous accidents where the director saw it and was like, oh, that's staying in the film. That's brilliant.
And I love it when directors just give that creative freedom to the actors, because I've seen some films do that before, and 9 times out of 10 they are one of the most acclaimed films and scenes of all time. And in this and this film specifically, that is the most famous line from the film, and maybe it's just because of the charm that it is in fact off the fly and not actually in the script or something like that. It just makes it special to me. I'd
love to do a report or something someday on like ad-libbed lines that were made up on the spot that have become the more famous. The only other one that springs to mind immediately, and again, slight tangent, is Star Wars. When I'm not spoiling because I know you probably haven't seen it yet, but at the end of Empire Strikes Back, it was scripted that Princess Leia says to Han Solo, I love you, and he says, I love you too. And Harrison Ford was like, he wouldn't say that. This guy's too cocky and too up himself. So it's now the most famous line in the film that Leia says, I love you, and Han responds, I know. Which is just like, that's far better than what was in the script, and it just came from Harrison Ford being like, no, this guy would never say that.
Yeah. But back to Captain Phillips. Absolutely, it's one of those moments. But with the next chunk of the film, there's not so much to say specifically, but complement the general things like the lighting and the subdued audio mixing. It relies heavily on these things to portray the pirates as intimidating and ruthless killers who will supposedly kill any crew member on sight as they go around the ship I'm on about. So one moment in particular where I think these elements absolutely shine is where all three of them are in the kitchen and Hanks notices Shane Murphy's character in the corner, who is, by the way, portrayed by Michael Kemus, who you, Michael, and some audience members may recognize as Tinkerer from Spider-Man Homecoming, a film literally next up on my big MCU watch list. Do you recognize him?
Nice. I recognized him from somewhere, but I didn't know where. But it's just clicked in my head as soon as you've said that. I knew that I'd seen him in something, but I was like, it could have been a soap or something I'd seen one time, but I know I've seen him. The only other guy that I recognized, which I'm sure you will appreciate, was the actor Corey something. I think it's Corey Johnson, who played Henry Van Staten in Dalek, the Doctor Who episode.
Yes. I didn't know who you were on about.
Prominently on the bridge, and I'm kind of like, oh, I know that guy. He was in Doctor Who.
I've noticed that in previous watches, but this time around I just didn't clock it, and I was like, oh yeah, that guy he was in Doctor Who, and I just thought, oh, that's an excellent bit. You know those tweets that often come up that say, oh, I'm such a Doctor Who fan that whenever I watch a film, I think, oh, that guy was from Doctor Who, and that's how I know actors. That's how I know actors. It's like, oh, you were in Doctor Who.
I'm the same. Doctor Who or Star Trek, I'm always like, oh, you've been in one of these things that I watch. So.
Instantly made the film better just because of your presence and because you've been in something I love.
Well, yeah, for me, I think it took me a little bit out of it because, like I said, I was buying that Tom Hanks was this real person. I didn't really know the rest of the bridge crew, so I was like, they could be real people. And then out of nowhere, I was like, ooh, but Henry Van Staten's on the bridge. That's kind of like, oof.
Yeah.
It's not his fault. I mean, he's a working actor. It was just like, it took me a tiny bit out of the movie for reality purposes. But no, it was just a funny thing I noticed. Yeah,
I did love the bit of a runaround where one of the crew members has to go up onto the deck to turn off the lights, and I think the use of sound effects is fantastic. Well, of course, the sound effects are intimidating not intimidating, imitating real life sounds that would be on the bridge. But what I'm trying to say is the lack of music, again, the subduedness of the score. Yet when they do realize the ship is falling apart, so to speak, the noises that, like the little beep 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 beep, to show that something's wrong. Like, these guys aren't the best English speakers, probably, but they can sense when something is wrong with the ship just because of an intimidating beep. And I love the scene where he kind of just the same scene, but where he throws the spanner across the deck, and then he has to come down and he goes around. I just think that's such a great little bit of direction as he goes down the stairs.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I had written like a note praising, because I was like, you know that something's got you when. Like I said, I thought I recognized the guy from somewhere, but I was completely in with the character. And again, not that I physically shouted out loud, but internally in my head when that happened, I was like, what the F are you doing, man? You're going to be in so much danger now. Then just caught myself and was like, dude, this is a movie, chill. But,
it goes to show that you were invested in the characters. Were there any like side characters, except from the main pirate guy, except from Phillips, that you were genuinely invested in as a character? Because those are the two that get praised a lot the most, and you can see why, because they are the focus of the film. But was there anyone else you formed some sort of attachment to out of interest?
Well, I think you could argue it's basically a two-hander film, and that's why even all the posters and stuff are basically Tom Hanks and Abdi, who played Moose, because it's a cat and mouse game between them in a lot of ways, and it's a two-header. The only other character that I specifically like really cared about was, and again, this is complete manipulation, but it worked, which is the young guy that ends up cut when the pirates seem very uncaring about it, and Phillips is like, you should get it seen to. It's going to be bad. I can see you're in pain, kind of thing. To the point where at the end he's the one that's like, stop writing. You're going to be in trouble. Which, by the way, apparently also never happened.
I'm not surprised, because it was pretty far-fetched that he didn't realize for so long.
That's very Hollywood, and I was like, he just happens to have found a pen that nobody saw, and then a bit of paper that nobody saw, and I was kind of like, this is pure Hollywood, and that's not in the book.
It's a great scene, but it just irks me that it goes on for so long, and you just got this guy saying, stop, and then no one recognizes that, even though, of course, you've got the ships in the background, it's very intense, and like, if you get rid of the music, it's like, what sound effects are there to mask this guy saying stop? You just gotta turn your brain off for a bit, or just like enjoy what they're trying to go with for that particular scene anyway.
I don't think you need that scene. I think we'd already perfectly established that he loves his wife and he was nervous, and he has kids that he's relating to this young Somali chap about and everything. That I don't think you need a scene that's like, I'm writing to my wife in case something happens, because we already know all of this. It's almost redundant, and it's kind of like, it feels like you had the sense to cut out the scenes of like the tension of the wife watching what's going on at home. I would have cut that as well, because I don't think you need it, and it stretches things just a little bit too far. Although it did
disagree now.
It did work for me in that I needed some kind of reason why he would have been so foolish, I guess, almost as to sort of fight back and be so like raged at the guy who was kind of constantly harassing him. And I was like, okay, I get the emotional beat here is you just wanted to write a letter to your wife and that guy was in your face about it, but maybe there could have been another way. I don't know. Like I said, it's one of those where I don't like that it exists, but I like what came out of it, if that makes sense.
It's the same thing with all the intensities towards the end, with all the Navy SEALs like jumping out of the helicopters with the parachutes. I think, well, first of all, their role isn't really explained, and when they just parachute into the sea, I'm so confused at what their actual role is.
Oh, I know that, but that's because I know Navy SEALs.
Could you please tell me? What were they doing?
They're just basically counter-terrorism type things. So they're kind of their mission is to not be seen and to get basically a position whereby they have a clear shot on the antagonists in this situation, but not harming any civilians, and then try to set up like where everybody is and stuff.
No, I'm aware about that, but they parachuted into the water.
Yeah.
So they parachuted into the water, then boarded the boat, presumably.
I just know they're called frogmen, and that's what they do. They kind of go into the water because it's less chance of being seen or something like that. Yeah. I didn't question it because I know I've seen it.
They must have boarded the boat, otherwise they'd have just been left there stranded to die.
It was one of those things, I think, where it was pure, again, it's more for Hollywood, because I remember reading that that kind of particular aircraft carrier wasn't on the scene, It was just a ship that happens to have took some Navy SEAL guys or whatever. But the Navy SEAL guys were completely independent of the ships or whatever that were there, and there was no like giving the order. They took it on their own back of like, we've now got a clean shot on all three, just do it. Because they were a trained team who did that, and weirdly, random bit of trivia, supposedly the same team that took out Osama bin Laden. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking what you were going to say was that the extras in the background that were like behind the desks on the ship are actually the crew members who were on the ship at the time.
Yeah, specifically, the most famous one is the medic woman who treats Phillips for his trauma. But yes,
we will get to that scene. I love that scene.
I have such a funny story about that scene. I don't know if you want me to save it or just give it now. You may even know it actually.
Go for it.
Which is that obviously she's a real whatever, it's like medic first class or whatever that it is in the Navy. And the first time they tried to film that scene, she was so starstruck because it was Tom Hanks that she couldn't really get her words out and couldn't do a whole lot. And then apparently the director sort of told her, we'll have to do better than that. And Tom Hanks just took her quietly to one corner and just whispered in her ear, yo, I'm the one who's supposed to be in shock and trauma, not you. Keep it together, do your job kind of thing.
Exactly the same. I would be exactly. He is my favorite actor.
On the second, which is the funny part, but on the other hand of things, on the more sort of emotional side of things, was second time round she did it, she just did her job because he was like, just do it as if you would with any other person, any other sailor. How would you do it? Go through the drill. But Hanks is acting on the second go around. Supposedly there's another Navy officer who was just on the scene, who plays a Navy officer, who as soon as the scene was finished filming apparently started crying and just told the director, I've seen trauma and that's what it looks like. And I was like, oh, that's acting, man. That's pure acting for you.
Like I've not read, I don't think, at least not this time around, if Tom Hanks took any specific lessons about the acting. Of course, he's done acting lessons beforehand, but in terms of, Eddie Redmayne did acting lessons to play what's his name, Stephen Hawking, and of course, like when there's a specific role that is being played that's not quote unquote normal, you sometimes have to have acting lessons because you're not that kind of person. And I just think, okay, Tom Hanks may not have had this trauma in terms of he's probably not been hanged, supposedly, hopefully not. And he's still got to portray that angst and fear and just complete disbelief of a guy who has supposedly just had a failed suicide attempt. Not suicide, obviously, like murder attempt.
Murder. I don't even think it's that. I didn't read that scene as that so much as like he didn't want it to end in bloodshed. And the sheer trauma of having 3 people killed right in front of you and then being left...
It's more of an acting thing as opposed to a character thing.
Oh, yeah, completely. But I mean, like, even from an acting point of view, he was kind of... that was the moment that really got me, was the sheer sort of almost the primal scream of, I can't believe this has happened, of like, I'm now covered in other people's blood. And even when he's getting the medical examination and she says, is it all from your eyebrow and whatever? And he says, no. And then just starts crying as he says, that's not my blood. Yeah. I was like, oh, wow, that's really powerful stuff throughout. But again, we're skipping way ahead, but that was just some stuff I wanted to shout out and give some praise to. So.
Yeah. I do like the music when Abdi's character is captured by the crew of the Berserk. It's incredible, and the use of the walkie-talkie to convey the message to the bridge is great, especially when you factor in the performance of Hanks and Ahmed, who look into each other's eyes with contrasting emotions. So Ahmed being the really intense, shouty guy. Yes, both are in disbelief, but Ahmed is more in crazed disbelief, where he could go off the wire at any second, whereas Hanks is in disbelief more so that he has been put into this situation where he could face the wrath of the pirates at any second, if that makes any sense. So like, yes, they were the same emotions, but one was intense and the other was, I'm surprised because I'm in a situation where I'm with this intense person and I could get the wrath of that intense person.
Yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to say was from the script point of view, building up the tension, because they're nervous and then they're kind of, they're always on tenterhooks. You don't know if they're going to be angry or whatever at any moment anyway, but then building up that they've got this narcotic that they're chewing on that gradually runs out.
Yeah.
So that when they get to the lifeboat, they've run out of that stuff and then they start running out of like tobacco and cigarettes. So the tension just gets gradually more and more, and you're kind of like, from a scripting point of view, I like that it emphasized that rather than just, because there's enough there really, but I did like that. And on a related note to that throughout, but especially during the scenes that you've talked about with following Shane around the ship and the kind of sounds and the tension of it all. I just specifically wanted to note that I think the editing and the direction throughout, but especially in those scenes for the tension, is just absolutely top notch. I don't think I could fault it at all. So,
I can't tell you how much I love doing 2 podcasts with you in terms of you have these qualifications in media. So you just use the word narcotic and I just think, what does that even mean? I'm just like a novice to film production, so I love it.
It's not quite as bad as all that, but kind of like drugs, basically. So they're chewing on like a leaf that apparently gives you a high almost, but it's... Some people claim it's no worse than caffeine and coffee. Some people say it's like kind of poppies and opium, but the truth's probably, again, somewhere in between. But
I've never taken that anyway, just because it's drugs, and second of all, because I hate coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. But yeah, it's spelled Khat, but pronounced chat. It's a beautiful incongruity that it's just called something so weird.
Yeah.
But
well, since we're there, pretty much, Phillips being taken onto the pirates' lifeboat. Well, the lifeboat with the pirates in, you could say, was really well done. From the lack of music, again, a common phrase for this film for me. Even though I do love the music when it is at the center front, unlike you, kind of in some cases. The subdued music was fantastic. Just before the big splash, we cut the music out, the music cuts out, and then the splash comes in, and then you get music and you get close-ups of the crew, which is some great direction, which is again one of your phrases you just said. Then we enter the second half of the film. Again, when I was rewatching this just to get my notes down, so I was like skimming through. The exact half point of this film is when we're onto the lifeboat. So half of the film is literally on the boat and also the setup in the first few minutes, and then the second half of the film is entirely on the lifeboat and also like with the Navy SEALs and stuff like that. And I just think that's a nice. I love it when stuff like that happens. It's like the big tonal shift happens right in the center of the film, or like a really specific time.
I said the same thing. Again, this is just going to sound very repetitive, but I said the same that when it came to the actual structure of the film and the pacing, which I'm usually very critical of, I absolutely, again, couldn't fault it because...
Yes.
I was worried there was going to drag and it was going to be potentially boring, and I was like, ooh, knowing vaguely what the story's about, I'm not sure how you can supposedly stretch in my head this to like 2 and a bit hours. But then I was like, do you know what? It actually really worked. And even to the point where it hit that halfway point and I'm like, okay, how are they going to get another hour out of this? He's already on the lifeboat. This is going to end soon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know the exact specifics. But then again, that last hour, I'm not like, oh, get on with it. It's finishing. It was too tense and it sucked you into it well enough, I think.
Yeah. We entered the second half of the film where the musical score is pretty minimal, as I said towards the start, with the exception of the really intense scenes that we'll be getting into again, I'm sure. I think this approach was excellent for me. Yes, some may find it a little boring, but it gives us time to learn about the pirates more through the eyes of Philip, which I think was a great choice. I don't think it would be boring. I think there's enough tension to keep it from being that way. And I'm critical of if something's boring me, I'm gonna feel it. Yeah, fair enough. The more we learn, the more we sympathise with Phillips, and when the time comes, we really get behind his motivations when he tries to escape, making us more invested in his safekeeping. Of course, we want him to be safe from the off, but the more we learn about the pirates, the more we acknowledge the severity and the deceitfulness of the crew, of the pirates. I think that's just fantastic writing, Michael.
Again, just repetitive, but I don't disagree. I think, like I said, those scenes build up tension so perfectly. Like I said, even adding the extra touches of them running out of the chat and running out of the cigarettes, even, the guy that tries to roll tobacco out of his old cigarette into a new one, and then the lifeboat hits like turbulence or a wave or whatever, and he ends up it ends up all over the boat, and he's like, oh, why couldn't you keep this thing straight? Little moments like that, coupled with, I think little stuff like that I preferred more than kind of like the over the top, like, don't give him any water, it's for us, kind of thing, where I was like, oof. There's a way to do it subtly, and there's a way to do it like, yeah, I get it, that guy's a bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
But again, I can't really criticize it because the whole point is that it's so tense that they would be on edge like that.
Yeah.
And again, I get that from a filmmaking perspective, you kind of need, firstly, you need a straight out and out villain, and secondly, you kind of need us not to sympathize too much with these guys who are going to end up dead at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So,
and it's again, to allude to that like sentiment, there was a scene where it's like, okay, it's a nice little moment where he's bandaging the guy's foot, and you think, yes, okay, this is a nice little moment, but then he pulls out the knife, and then it cuts back to reality where these guys are on edge, and they think, oh my god, he's got a knife, what are you doing? I'm going to shout at you now just because you have a knife, and that could endanger us. And I just think, yes, there's some nice moments in here where you can build some character sympathizing with these pirates, but at the end of the day, they are doing illegal work, so to speak, and they are very aggressive. And
completely.
I think,
and in terms of that particular scene, I love how Tom Hanks underplayed, without acting, like overacting, and without even any dialogue, the kind of fact that he absentmindedly was like, he's fixing somebody up, and so naturally he reaches for his penknife or Swiss Army knife, whatever it is, to cut the bandage, as he would, 1,000 times, and doesn't realize, oh crap, it's a knife. Of course they're peeved about this. I was like, I completely bought that 100%, which again is a what's the word? An example of a great actor doing something with very little. I'll be quiet now.
No. I think we are approaching the end of the film. Of course, there's going to be some little moments in there that we may want to mention. But I think one of the biggest and most intense scenes, of course, except from the ending, is where he tries to escape. And I think, oh my god, this is so well directed and shot. Like, there's some scenes underwater. There's some scenes where you're like, okay, so Phillips is being quote unquote tortured in this lifeboat, okay? This isn't at the point where he's being strangled and stuff like that. That comes after. But what I'm trying to say, he's been in this lifeboat for several days, undernourished, he's probably thirsty as hell, and that probably means he's getting a bit ill, so he's a bit disorientated. And I just think the way they shot it, so some bits are above water, some bits are underwater. Of course, water makes you out of breath, especially if you're doing a lot of swimming, so you hear the breaths of Tom Hanks. I think the audio mix is fantastic, but the lights of the ship, of the big ship, and they kind of just move the lights across the lifeboat and across the water as Hanks is kind of trying to swim away and struggling. I think that kind of does a really good job at showing the disorientation of Phillips. And again, it's about the shooting and also, the direction, which I think was top notch in this segment specifically.
Completely, and I like that they cut back at times. Yes, fair enough when you're in it and you're amongst the kind of the sea and you're feeling the tension, but also the decision to cut back and kind of show that from the ship's perspective, it's like we don't know what's going on. How many people are in the water? Who is it? What's going on?
And again, it's just one of those stupid moments. Like, it's a real life problem, not a movie problem. Whereas, like, of course, it's going to be Phillips in this situation where he's swimming away from the ship. Of course, that's going to be Phillips. Just because you can't see it, why aren't you shooting the bastards? Fuck you.
Well, it's not so much that as they don't know which one, because I mean it's pitch black and they don't know which one is Phillips and which one is the guy trying to get him, and it's like if they shoot the wrong person, then that's game over, But one thing I did want to bring up in terms of like real life compared to the way the film portrays it is that this is one of the rare examples, I think, where the reality is even worse than the movie. Because I read that the real Captain Phillips they staged mock executions the entire 5 days he was on the lifeboat. So there was no just sitting politely and feeling the tension. They were doing that like to psychologically torment him, basically. And that coupled with like not being sort of, not being cared, not having water and food and stuff. He didn't actually say I need a wee or whatever. He just saw some guy taking a piss and apparently made a run for it, because at that point he was so desperate and so like psychologically wrecked that he was like, I just want off this lifeboat. And apparently it was even hotter than it's portrayed in the film as well, which they say it's kind of hard to portray.
I'm so glad they didn't include that. I'm sure if they included those light moments, if they took a different direction with the film, I think it could potentially be just as great. But I'm just glad that they didn't, because yes, it's FOMO, like fear of missing out, but there's got to be a certain point where you're like, okay, this works. Would I like it to be different? Not yes, maybe, because I want to see how it kind of pans out and how they portray a real life situation. But I'm really happy with the alternative fictional tale they give.
I understand why they didn't do it, because from a movie making perspective, it would be incredibly boring if you just showed 5 scenes of mock executions back to back. Because that's not dramatic. You know what I mean?
Maybe one mock. Before,
Which, to be fair, they do. That's the point, is that it gets to. That's what you're basically saying at the very end when things have reached that tension point. But sadly, reality sometimes is stranger than fiction, and the fact that it was that tense the entire time gives you a bit more respect for the reality of the situation, I think. So,
yeah. And knowing that makes, like, just by Phillips being in that situation, I think it is disrespectful by the crew for calling Phillips out and like tying him to a lawsuit. Like, yes, he probably did well in terms of finances because of it, and the crew may not have done. So they kind of felt envious and jealous of him. But still, there's got to be a point where you just think, okay, this guy may not have been the best supervisor to us, but we have to sympathize with a situation where he was kidnapped, he was beaten, he was strangled, he was hung, kind of, and you got to reach a point where you just think, is it worth it? And I don't knowing that now, I back that point even more. Is like, why are you doing that?
I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like to think that's it and you're going to die multiple times. Yeah. Because there's nothing worse than me psychologically than being like a mock execution, which is just so cruel. Because it's like any time it could be for real and you just don't know. And every time you're in a place where it's like, oh, I'm dead, they're going to kill me this time. So it's like, I can't imagine much that's worse. But again, at the same time, I understand why the film wouldn't show the reality of that, because it would be boring as flip just watching that time and time again. And perhaps it would be a little bit too emotionally devastating for the viewer. Because, you'd be like, oh, we're at a 10 the entire time and we just need to have a bit of sort of slightly subtler tension maybe.
And it was very subtle. They took a very different approach. It was more subtle with some bits that were really intense where the music really hams up, but they do take a different approach, and I think that definitely works because, again, it's to do with the storytelling. You criticize one of the actors or the characters for being very one-note, and I think if it didn't have the subduity, if that's even a word, I hope it is, then I think if they didn't have that, it would be very repetitive in how the story was told, if that makes sense.
No, it's exactly what I was trying to say. Completely agree.
You're drinking water, aren't you?
I was drinking Lucozade.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I heard the little gulp, and then you tying up the bowl lid. That was funny.
Apologies. Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else? Any little notes you have before the climax?
No, it was just a couple of notes on the climax. I don't really have a lot else to say, so I won't get too much into it. Okay. But just to say that the ending, I think, gained. I won't say what my final score is, but the ending, as I said to you, I think gained the film half a point just for itself. And I just said that the ending was emotionally just devastating. I absolutely felt like I was going through the ringer with it, and it's incredibly tense as the film is throughout, but it reaches another level of tension at the end, and it completely sucks you in. Yeah. At no point was I like, for better or worse, oh, this is just a film, or oh, I just don't feel this. It completely gets you. And again, that's credit to acting, direction, editors, and everybody that worked on the film to make it that moment. But it does make it to the point that I also made to you, which is like, this isn't exactly a feel-good movie. It's not something I would stick on like, oh, I feel like watching just a movie that's upbeat and cheery. And it's not a film I would reach for to rewatch a load anyway, but certainly
I must be a complete psychopath because I've rewatched this one about 7 times.
Which isn't to say I wouldn't rewatch it, particularly even if I'm like, oh, I want to watch a movie that's good with an emotional performance in it, if I'm feeling up to that kind of thing. And I have films like that. It's not that I don't, but again, the ones I tend to gravitate to tend to be more like I want like escapism. I want to break from reality, but which isn't to say there isn't a place for these films at all. It's just that it will naturally, I think, get less play for me. But I am pleased to have been able to have found it for under £3 on Blu-ray and own it, and it's on the shelf. So,
yeah. do you think you're ever gonna rewatch this?
I think I could definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's not, like I said, I don't think I'll rewatch it a lot, but I can see myself coming to. A year down the line, like, oh, I haven't seen that, like, and I'm feeling like I want to watch a quote-unquote good movie with a good performance or whatever in it. But I do think it's one of those things where if I did rewatch it, I would immediately make sure I had like an episode of a sitcom or something to watch straight afterwards.
Yeah.
As a palate cleanser, yeah.
Yeah, I love the word palate cleanser. Well, the phrase palate cleanser. It's like, oh, I've watched something so unbelievably crap. I now have to watch something unbelievably good. Just so I think James May says it, like he does food try videos on YouTube where he's like, he prepares food and eats it, and then if it's not particularly nice, or if he's like comparing foods, he drinks wine in between, and he just says, I'm going to drink some of my palate cleanser now, and he just grabs for his bottle of wine, and I just think that's hilarious, so I adopted it.
Nice.
But yeah, the final scene, fantastic, and again, another bit of a diversion, but please indulge me. I love that word as well, indulge. You introduced me to that word, indulge.
Fair enough.
But yeah,
I'm to blame.
Yeah, so whenever I went up to my aunt's house, who lives elsewhere, I sometimes, like when this film came out, like it came out in 2013, but I think I watched it plenty of times in like 2014, 2015, years like that. Whenever we went up there, I would just chuck it on because Sky always promoted it for some reason. It was always on the homepage or on the front of the Sky Cinema. So I thought, okay, I'll watch this again. And every time, my family were just like, oh, you're watching this again. My granddad really loves this film. And again, though, my nan and my aunt were like, oh, he's watching that again. I might sit down for the first half hour, but if something happens, I'm going to leave. And but I rewatched this again about a month ago, before I even knew we were doing it for the podcast. I watched it with my nan, who initially thought she had watched it all the way through. But I was like, you haven't, because there was always these distractions. Like there was always something to do because at my aunt's house I've got young cousins, so often you're on your feet, so there wasn't enough time to watch the film. So I was like, no, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna watch the film all the way through. And whilst my nan had watched the first hour 15, she hadn't seen the final hour where they're predominantly in the lifeboat. So this kind of hit her, and she was like, yes, I'm glad we watched it. It was a fantastic film, and she really appreciates the music, from the music to the acting to the story. So she loved it. And again, it's just like one of the quote-unquote naysayers. No, I'm not going to say naysayers. Just like, if you don't give a movie a go, you're not going to know if it's any good or if you're going to like it. So just chuck it on, even if you're a bit on the fence, and you'll probably love it, especially if someone you know recommends it. And I think this is another case of that with you.
Yeah, completely. I definitely would say give it a go, even if you don't necessarily, like me, think that you might like biopics, or you're worried that it might be boring, and just see if it hooks you in. I think if you're not on board and you're not invested by the time the pirates board the ship, then maybe it's not for you, and don't carry on, especially if you're expecting it not to get emotionally worse, because I can imagine it was a very different experience for anybody who's seen the first half of the film a lot and then came into the second, when it almost is like a completely different, much more emotionally draining movie. So, yeah.
But yeah, the final scene is excellent. Again, you've spoken about the trauma and all of that being portrayed excellently, so I don't have much else to add for that. I don't have a conclusion, but I will just say I thoroughly love this film. I must have rewatched it. I can count the amount of times I've rewatched it on two hands. I absolutely adore it. I just love this kind of genre, like the character biopic stuff, and yeah.
I might have a conclusion for you.
Okay, go for it. Is this your conclusion, or is this just one you found?
No, this is your conclusion.
Wait, what?
Courtesy of Letterboxd, my good friend Will Templar wrote a review
let's go.
that says, this is the audience interaction section right here. But you said, everybody must watch this. Such a brilliant, thrilling, well-acted, well-directed, well-scored film. The final 5 minutes makes the second half of the film worth the wait for the climax. Great film, probably the movie I rewatch the most. And I won't give you a score, but I will say that was... I was just looking to see if any of my friends had rated the movie or said anything about it on Letterboxd, and I came across your review. So I was like, when you said you didn't have a conclusion, I was like, yes, you do.
I'm glad I gave that conclusion, because it's actually, written, because some of my reviews are just like one line, and I just think I'm not invested in this movie enough to actually give it a well thought out review like some of the top reviews on films. So I just say, this is good, and something like that. But yeah, I actually put some effort into it.
It's funny you should say that because the only other letterboxed review I found amongst my friends was from my friend Alex Marzonia, who, by the way, fantastic YouTuber. Go look him up. He does lots of good music and stuff. He rated the film 3.5 stars, and his one-word review is butt clencher. All right, Alex, that's thorough.
Did any of your other friends give a score? Maybe not a review, but a score?
No, nobody else had even watched it. But then I've only got 18 letterboxed friends. But whilst we're on the subject of audience interaction, we did put out a poll as well onto the Twitter, Hit or Miss the Big Screen podcast Twitter, which is in desperate need of more followers.
I'm so glad you side-pedaled it on because I was going to get my score and then you told me at the start, don't give your score until after the audience. No. I'm glad you interrupted me.
Well, the way I did it last time, and as I say, I've got the graphics for it, was audience interaction, and then I think I gave my score first, then yours last time, but it depends who's showing who the film, so we'll probably take yours and then mine this time. But yeah, in terms of audience interaction, we did put out a poll, which, as I said, on the Hit or Miss the Big Screen podcast. Please follow us on Twitter. We really are in need of more followers. We are doing okay, but we could do with doing better. Only 8 people voted in the poll, but, for the sake of completion, I simply said, what would you rate the film out of 5 stars? Absolutely nobody said under 2.5, which is good. Yep. 12.5% of those 8 people said that it was between 2.5 and 3 stars. 25% of the people who responded said it was 3.5 to 4 stars. And the vast majority, 62.5%, said it was 4.5 to 5 stars.
Excellent people.
Yeah, I think the audience are kind of those that have seen the movie. I think is what we can take from that, are on board with it. So yeah. So did you want to go ahead and give your final score?
Did we have any fan interaction on Facebook? Maybe.
No, I looked. I tried, but nobody responded that they'd even seen the movie. But it's one of those. I think people weren't responding because a lot of people may not have seen it, especially as you pointed out amongst my friends who are very much sci-fi and superheroes. Yeah. So they probably didn't see it, but it's a shame, and I hope. Hopefully, if we put the podcast out, it might interest some people into watching it for the first time, because I do think they should. So yeah, that'd be cool.
But you did read out my conclusion from another day. When was that conclusion wrote, by the way?
It was March of 2020, I think. Hang on, because it's saved in my photos.
A whole year and a half ago.
4th of March 2020.
Blimey. Yeah, and I've rewatched about
Alex Marzonia's fantastic one-word review was from 15th of February 2014, if anybody's curious.
Long time ago. I personally love this film. Again, with the few criticisms that you did point out, yes, I agree with one of those, but one or two of the other little nitpicks I didn't pick up on at all, kind of for me at least, on the amount of times I've rewatched it. So maybe that's just you noticed it that I just haven't. But that doesn't affect my score in any way. There are very few things you can kind of. There's no major flaws in this film, I don't think. Being the film buff you are, I'm sure you'd have pointed out if there were some, gaping flaws. But again, I just think it's such a solid character drama. Feel free to interject here. Did you find any big flaws, notable flaws? Except for
no, I mean, I'll go over what my review is after yours, but no, I didn't know.
Okay, but yeah, I'm not ashamed to give this movie a 5 out of 5 rating.
5 stars, excellent. Well, as I said, I really, really liked the movie. In short, basically, I don't know about perfection because my nitpicks would be the music and kind of sound was a little overpowering in the second half. I could have done with a little bit more backstory and more depth for the characters, especially outside the main two. And it was a little bit kind of Hollywood and cliche at times. But on the flip side of that, all of the praise that I've already said, plus, as I said, to reiterate, A+ acting, direction, editing, pace, all of that. It's one of those films where I think it's either going to suck you in or it doesn't, but I can't really understand how it doesn't to anybody that doesn't respond to it. I found it, like I said, very tense. It gripped me, and the ending is just emotionally devastating in the sort of best way in terms of performance and whatever. So, but as I say, it's just short of perfection, but I definitely would say 4.5 out of 5 stars would be my particular score for it as well.
Very positive, and I think that's a really good score, and I wouldn't hard disagree with that at all.
Oh, We should specify, therefore, that the final score from the podcast is 4.75 out of 5.
I swear to God, even with the two of us, we're never going to agree on a perfect score, are we? Like on Spin the Wheel and Hit or Miss, the Doctor Who podcast, we've never had a universal 10 out of 10. God damn it.
We've got a chance in the next two of the next 4 stories.
Yeah. I think we're both going to struggle to rate anything below like a 5 out of 5 for the last two, just because they are such acclaimed movies. So like, okay, there's a point where subjectivity is of course a part of all movies, but sometimes you just gotta look at a film and you think, blimey, that was just fantastic, and it's like, yes, I agree with the consensus here. And I think the final two films are such acclaimed stories, and we're both looking forward to each other's movies.
Yeah, I think just like these, it's going to come down to, I think, the person that hasn't seen it. Because I think, again, we didn't select them, but when they landed, I think we were both like, wow, this is special kind of thing. Yeah. So it'll depend if the other person agrees or not. And again, there's lots of factors that might stop that, that where you are in your life when you're watching it for the first time, and if it's an older movie or a newer movie and whatever else. But yeah, we'll see.
Speaking of which, Michael, would you like to reveal what movie we'll be watching next week, and why is a movie that is on the list?
Next week's movie is part of the experiment that we had, where it was like, we don't want to just talk about well-regarded and good movies, because that might get boring, and sometimes there are interesting things to say about movies that might not have a great reputation. With that in mind, one of the movies that I put down as supposedly a bad movie, but that I could probably talk about and that I at least find entertaining and watchable and have seen far more times than I like. It did come up. It's an infamous movie. It was nominated for multiple Razzie Awards and won at least one that I'm aware of. And it is 1997's film that for 8 years killed the Batman franchise. It's Batman and Robin. So,
oh dear Lord.
So it'll be ice to see that one.
But again, it's going to be one that Michael has seen, I have not seen, just like the other bad film that's going to be in episode 4. That will be my pick, or not a pick, but it's the film that I've seen that Mike hasn't. So I'm looking forward. I'm not looking forward to it, but it's going to be.
It's not enjoyable. That's the thing. It's like I would feel bad if it was a film that's like bad on the level of, I can't believe it's painful to watch. It's like, if you acknowledge that you're basically going into it watching a live action cartoon and not expect good drama, it's still fun.
It's dear Lord, is that what I have to expect?
Yeah, completely. Like, just go along for the ride and just think, let's not try and take this seriously. If you've seen like the likes of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, just picture literally the exact opposite of that.
Absolute scenes, if we actually give it a positive rating, like above a 2.5. Happens.
Under no circumstances could I possibly say it's a good film. I can see you can enjoy watching it.
If we both watch it and we're like, okay, this isn't as bad as I remembered, then maybe, just maybe, we'll see again.
For the first time, I'm certainly not going to judge you if you watched it for the first time, completely divorced of the context, and I don't know how much of a Batman fan you are. Maybe you're just really. You've just seen the odd bit. In which case, you won't.
Nolan trilogy. That's about it.
You won't be as invested in the character in that case as like a lot of the people. Like, to an extent myself, but a lot of people that were kind of like, this isn't a character from the comics, boo. Yeah. But I mean, we'll see. As I say, I don't think it's not fun. It's an enjoyable enough time, and I have watched it multiple times. And I do own the Blu-ray, although that is because I'm a completist, and it did come in the 4-film box set of the first, not the first, but the 89 to 97 Batman films. So we'll be getting into that next week. Thank you to those of you that listened.
Thank you.
No, you go.
Thank you to those who actually listened to the entire podcast all the way through, and to those who didn't as well. So some people could have watched halfway through, and if that's the case for you, I don't know how you're going to hear this because you didn't even hear it to the end. But I don't know why I went on that tangent again. We hope to see you next week. I've been Will. This has been Michael. And don't
forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, tell your friends. Go
You'd
follow us on Twitter.
This guy's the YouTuber, wouldn't you? Like I'm meant to be the YouTuber in this case, and I forget about like subscribing and commenting and peace and stuff like that. But do all of those things. Subscribe, which is one of the things that you mentioned. This is crap. But join us next week for Batman and Robin. For now, see you in a
Take
bit.
care. Hit on this big screen on Facebook and Twitter. Bye. Bye.
Bye.